Today, I'm going to remove the engine from the Subaru Sambar. Last night, I didn't film it, unfortunately, but I took the bed off the back. It's like 10 bolts, so I figured I would remove the bed to take the engine out. I'm going to take the engine out of the truck to rebuild it. Figure if I'm going to be driving this thing around, I don't really know exactly how the condition is of it. The compression on a couple of the cylinders are not terrible, but they're not great. So I figured the rebuild kit is extremely cheap, so might as well just do a rebuild on it. So first things, we're going to remove the back bumper piece here. I'm probably going to take the wheels off to work on it easier, put it on the jack stands, and then we're going to need to disconnect basically all the wiring. We're going to need to pull out the basically the CV axles here for the transaxle, pull all that apart, and then disconnect all the exhaust stuff, all these radiator lines and the heat lines, and remove this engine. So shouldn't be too bad of a job actually, since I can reach it from the top, but let's get at it. Alright, so we got the engine out of the truck, as you can see. I didn't show it in a video, but I kind of cleaned up the garage, organized it, spilled a lot of fluids on the ground, so I needed to pressure wash all that out of there. So now what we got to do, I pressure washed down the engine, got a lot of the dirt and mud off of it that was from the previous owner. I got to take off this cross-member support bar here. I'm going to try to take some of the accessories off the engine, and then I'm going to need to disconnect the entire transaxle to off the engine as well, because really the engine is only like from here out. Like the rest of this is basically the differential for the rear and the transmission. So need to get this all taken apart so I can get down to the engine by itself to do the rebuild. So I'm gonna start taking those apart as well. Got the engine really, the whole frame and everything is now really clean. There was so much mud just everywhere in this thing, like, you know, you can still see there's mud like in places even though I sprayed it multiple times. So the previous owner really just, I don't know, went crazy in the mud with this thing. So all right, so I got all the parts. The exhaust thing was actually really covered in dirt, but I don't think actually I can use this muffler anymore. It's hard to tell, but down here it's all rusted and it's open because the way this thing like sat, water could sit in it, like sit against it, so it's like it got really rusty. So not sure if I'm gonna be able to reuse this. Probably not. Maybe if I can clean that I could weld it, but other than that, probably not. But got all the other parts clean. I'm going to really just focus on getting this engine apart as my first goal. Alright, so got the transmission separated here from the engine, which is now going to make it a lot easier to work with. So I'm going to put this away. I'm going to probably change the transmission fluid out later on it, but really what I got to do is take a lot of the accessories off of this, so rebuild it. So we're going to take off the clutch plate, the flywheel. We're gonna get the carb, everything off, all these hoses. Let's get the alternator, pulleys, everything off of here, and then that way I can mount it on the engine stand, take it, and then actually really work on the block to get it ready to go to be rebuilt. So let's do it. lead now off the engine. And what was interesting was when I looked at this, there was some water in the cylinder. I think that's just because one of the valves is open when I was pressure washing it, so it's no big deal. But what I did notice was, it's hard to tell, is the way the gasket broke apart, the head gasket broke apart. It's, I'm not sure if I was getting some water into the cylinders, but I could see like rust on some of these rings. And it's really, really greasy in it. So I assume that I'm just getting like oil blow-by or something on this thing, because some sort of blow-by on it. I try to rotate the assembly here. It's like the assembly is a little hard to rotate, but you can see actually there's like a rust ring actually on some of this stuff, where I don't know how that water would have got in there to rust. Like I didn't spray water on this thing that would have done that. So I don't know. I think I have, but the weird thing about it was I did not have, I didn't have any bubbles coming back when I did a leak down test. I didn't have anything coming back through the radiator. I really could hear the air coming out of the valve cover, which is where when you pressurize the cylinder, and you can hear a lot of air coming out of if you take the oil cap off the valve cover, you can hear a lot of air blowing. That means the air is pushing past the rings on the piston. And I did that for every single one of these, and the air rushing was a lot. And I wasn't getting any air coming back through the intake manifold, or like I said, the radiator wasn't bubbling at all. So I don't know, it's weird how there could be some water in there. The cylinders don't look terrible. So let's see, grab the rake here, kind of wipe them off a little bit. So the cylinders don't look really bad, but I'm gonna need to pull it all apart, and I'm gonna need to measure it. I was checking for any type of play in the piston, because sometimes if you get your rings that really go bad, or anything else, like the piston will actually kind of rock back and forth in the cylinder as a way to show you that it's, that the rings are bad. But these seem pretty snug for the most part, so I'm not sure. I think it's why I probably had okay compression when I did the dry compression test. And I could probably only rotate this thing because it's so small. If this was a bigger engine, I'd have to use a wrench. So we'll flip it over, take off the oil pan, and then we'll pull out the whole assembly there. Got the whole block torn down. I got my light here. It's covered in oil. It's all dirty from touching it when I was taking the engine apart. So the cylinders don't look bad, but I don't know. There's definitely some spots on them that, you know, kind of make me think that this thing either had like water in it or something. But I think the piston rings definitely were gone on the thing. You know, so looking at one of these, I think it was probably this cylinder. You know, this one, I don't know, it's hard to tell, but I don't know. You know, I think either way, we'll clean the block down and all the parts. We'll use the bore gauge. We'll measure the bore on each cylinder, kind of see if it's within spec for whether or not I can just still use these pistons, or if I have to bore the engine over, which basically means I have to increase the size of these by a certain amount and basically go with bigger pistons. The reason for that is if parts of the cylinder, because these cylinders are not going to be perfectly straight up and down, they're going to actually be kind of funneled shape because the piston's been going up and down and there's so much that it wears. So if they're beyond the spec where I can just change out the piston rings and reuse them, then we have to change out the pistons themselves, which means you have to go with a bigger piston, and then you have to bore this cylinder, each cylinder out a little bit bigger to fit those bigger pistons. So hopefully it's not going to be that. Hopefully just use the bore. Hopefully the bore is within spec, which means I can just hone the cylinder, and honing it just basically means that you're essentially kind of cleaning up any possible like burrs, things like that could be on the cylinders, and so that you know, it has a good seal when you put in the new piston when you put in the piston with new rings. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully don't have to get it bored. I'll just get the whole block probably cleaned by the machine shop, and I'll have them hone it and make sure that the top here, I'll have to check the top of the block as well, make sure that is actually flat. So we'll do that as well. I've laid a lot of the components out here on my bench, cleaned them, inspected them, but obviously kept everything numbered, cylinders 1 to 4. Mostly just doing a lot of cleanup and inspection on them. Pistons actually look pretty good. The bearing caps don't look great actually, so that could be part of the problem why the thing wasn't running really well for it. But crankshaft looks really good. So let's see. So I've torn down the head, the cylinder head down completely. It's now completely empty there. All the valves are out. The valves look pretty good, but I'll inspect them later. This is going to go to the machine shop to be cleaned. I don't think I need to have anything else done to it, but we are going to port and polish the heads. So what I'm really going to show you guys today is we are going to check the bore, measurements of the bores here. What I'm looking for is to make sure that it is within spec of what the factory says is allowed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using a micrometer, and I'm going to be using my bore gauge as part of that. We're going to put the bore gauge into here, and we're going to check it. But this is just a comparison tool. Really, this is what is going to be used to measure it. So, all right. Okay, so I have set this micrometer to be the allowed distance of the cylinder, which is 56 millimeters essentially is what's in here. This is an inch micrometer, and this is an inch bore gauge, so I have to convert it, but essentially just know that the allowed distance is around 56 millimeters for the cylinders. So I set this micrometer to 56. So then what you do is you need to put the bore gauge in here like this. It's a little tricky to hold, and what we're doing is we're basically zeroing the bore gauge, and it's hard to tell here because it's hard to hold it in here. It's a little tricky, but I'm trying to show you guys. So what you're seeing here is, oops, there. All right. So what you're seeing here is I'm actually moving the bore gauge back and forth inside the micrometer, and what I'm really looking for is, and I already zeroed this beforehand, but see how when I'm going to zero but it's not climbing as I move forward, that's telling me that's really the top. That's as far as it's going to go, and I moved the face here to 0 as part of that. So I know that that is set. So now that I know that my bore gauge is 0 and I'm good to go, I can come over here and I can actually put this down into the bore. Now I'm going to take technically 6 measurements total. So I'm going to do a measurement this way, and I'm going to do a measurement this way, and I'm going to do 3 spots all the way down the cylinder. First one is, let me grab some light. So I'm going to actually do one measurement right here, kind of below the lip. You can kind of feel it just where the cylinder wears. I'm going to do one right down here. I'm going to do another one about halfway down, and then all the way one towards the very bottom. And what I'm looking for is I'm going to take 3 measurements because I want to actually know the taper of the cylinder, because as an engine wears, it doesn't wear perfectly straight. It wears actually kind of at an angle. And I want to know that also when I take measurements this way, the thrust way, and then the radius way, so that I can compare the two. And I'll know, 1, if I'm out of round, but then 2, I'll know my diameter. And as long as I'm within spec, then I can reuse these pistons with just new rings, and I don't have to actually have the cylinders bored out and go with a larger size piston. I don't want to have to do that, so hopefully we're within spec. So what I'm going to do is basically we just take the bore gauge and you carefully kind of insert it like this, right towards the top. And now watch, as I bring it up, it's going to spin around once, and then as I'm coming up here, I'm going to start wiggling it back and forth and looking for the highest point the needle goes to. So you can kind of see it doesn't want to seem to go past, that's like 10 thousandths essentially. If it was to go to the right of the 0, it means that it's getting bigger, which is probably obviously not possible. So I'd expect it to always be to the left. I'm sorry, I'd be getting smaller, which tells me, because it's obviously the engine's been wearing past this, and we zeroed this to 56 millimeters. So this is telling me that I'm 56 and basically 10 thousandths roughly on there. So that's the first point. So then I'm going to take the other 2 measurements, because I know that the first one is about 10 thousandths. Let's go down to about halfway now in here. Let's see. It's about 10 thousandths as well. And I'll go to the very bottom, almost to the bottom. Make sure that I'm straight in there. And that one's about, that one's actually closer to probably, I mean, it's about 10 thousandths almost as well. So not bad, just at least on the thrust axis. So then what we're going to do is we're going to turn it. So I'm now going to measure this way, crankshaft way, all the way down as well. So we'll basically put this guy in here, about here. Change angles here. You can see now that I am parallel with the crankshaft. And yeah, let's see. So that's actually less than 10 thousandths. That's hundreds thousandths. That's 5. Yeah. All right, let's do another one down halfway down. Let's see where that one's at. Yeah, same thing. And then same thing. So you can tell that the cylinder is obviously not perfectly round. Essentially, I would expect the cylinder to be bigger this way than this way when after you've had miles on it, and that is because the piston, I'll grab one of these pistons to show you. You can see when you look at these pistons, essentially the piston sits in here like this. It's in there like that way. Because you see it's got the side long skirts on the side here. So basically when this goes up and down in here, the crankshaft is spinning and it's kind of pushing it harder against these sides of the walls, the thrust sides. So that is why both of these sides is about, you know, 5/100 thousandths bigger than this way, which is expected. I got the engine block, a bunch of parts back from the machine shop. I didn't film it, but it didn't come back looking like this. I actually painted it. Got like this high temp cast iron style paint. I kind of cleaned the whole block, but they soda blasted a bunch of parts for me. So I had a bunch of parts here that were pretty dirty, and so they soda blasted everything for me, including the valve cover. It's really clean. I just primed it right here. No, geez. So I primed it. I actually have some this blue wrinkle paint coming that we're going to paint it in blue. So it's going to look pretty awesome. So right now it's just primed. I'm going to paint it blue, and then what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to use a razor blade. And I'm actually going to then remove the paint back off this outer area and on the top of the Clover 4 letters. So that way it'll be blue down in the Subaru, but then it will be like this silver color. It'll be silver basically with the original metal below to give it like this nice like two-tone color on it. So the wrinkle paint's also like texture when you let it dry, so that's gonna be cool. So, you know, now that I got the block painted and they also honed it, so it's probably kind of hard to see, but you can see there's kind of a pattern now in them, and if you remember before they were totally smooth. So now that they're honed, that's gonna be really important. So always hone your engine if you're going to just change out the piston ring, so and make sure that it has a place for the oil to sit to lubricate it. I'll probably need to, I cleaned the block after I got it back because they soda blasted it, and there can be soda residue. Basically it's baking soda in there, and there's some, I can see kind of down in the water jacket. It's kind of hard to tell, there's like a little bit, like, taking my light in here. There's like, you kind of see some of it down in there. So I think I need to kind of clean it out a little bit more, just because I don't want baking soda, obviously, like in the coolant. So I'm gonna need to kind of go back over it. But other than that, this cast iron high temp paint I got is awesome looking. I mean, I didn't want to paint the block so that it was like some shiny silver color or something. So this makes it look like it's almost like the raw metal, but giving it a nice paint. So I put about 3 coats of primer on it first, and then I put about another 3 coats then of this on here as well. So it should protect it, give it some more protection so it doesn't rust off anymore. You can kind of see the other side here. Yeah, I mean, it just looks awesome. It just looks great. Yeah, so all right, so now that I got this done, we'll let it fully dry overnight. I'm gonna probably tomorrow, I'm gonna clean up these parts. I'm gonna paint these parts actually the same color. So, you know, this is cast metal as well, so you know it fits with the color. So I'm gonna paint a bunch of these parts up, get them all clean. The head, I also got the head back from the machine shop, and the head came out really well. So let's flip this thing over. So if remember before, you know, there was just carbon buildup in all of these areas. There was carbon in all of the ports. Now they're fully cleaned out, as you can see. Clean as can be, pretty much. There's a little bit of carbon right there, but for the most part, it's fully cleaned out. So I'm gonna re-clean it because there's some baking soda residue left in some small areas. Not a big deal. And basically get ready so I can reassemble the entire head. As you can see, I got the valves put the head actually over here. Basically, you got the cylinder 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is the intake side. This is the exhaust side. I need to clean up the carbon. Oops. I need to clean the carbon up on all these valves. They're pretty dirty, so I'm gonna do that. Get them cleaned up. I got let's see. And then on top of that, I got all of the parts in for the gaskets and everything. So the entire engine rebuild kit. So let's take a look. Nothing's better than getting a bunch of parts in. So I'm always happy about that. Let's see. So this is an entire, gasket set right here. You can kind of see in here. This is the exhaust gasket, valve cover, main seals, valve stem seals, pretty much everything you need. That's a good kit. This is a new timing belt I got here. I got a new thermostat, distributor rotor. I got a brand new distributor cap. My distributor cap was fine, but the kit comes with one, so it was just better to go ahead and just say replace it. Let's see, I also got new piston rings as well. Obviously, we need to do that because I think that was pretty much what was wrong with the engine in the first place. So, got new rings. So, when we go to rebuild the engine, that'll be one of the first things we're going to be working on, is we're going to reassemble the bottom assembly first. Let's see, brand new main bearings, and the connecting rod bearings as well as a new water pump. I went ahead and let's see. I said, might as well go ahead and replace it, because the water pump I think was okay, but just if I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna do the timing belt and I'm gonna fix everything up, then might as well go ahead and replace it. Just gonna make the engine that much better. So we're getting close to starting to do the reassemble of the whole engine. I'm really excited. I don't know, the assembly of the engine is pretty much my favorite part of working on the car, and especially when you start to paint them and things like this, and they come out and they're really clean. Once you get the whole engine together, it's just awesome to look at. So I'm gonna start doing that, and I think tomorrow we're gonna pull out, which I didn't film this, but I put a lot of nuts and bolts into a vinegar solution that were for any nuts and bolts that weren't looking so hot. So this one right here is had the exhaust manifold in it, and it's disgusting in there, but it's been sitting in there for probably about a week and a half, and all the rust has come off that manifold. So I'll have to pull this all out, pressure wash it down. You can kind of see like this one right here is like just disgusting, but with what's in these things. But vinegar, distilled white vinegar, is like one of the best things to use to get rid of rust and grime off of bolts. You have to pull them off, you have to pressure wash them, and then you still kind of typically have to take some sandpaper or some sort of a polisher to get them looking like they're brand new bolts again. So it takes a little legwork, but it's totally worth it if you want the engine to look great. So yeah, so tomorrow, a bunch of cleaning work, get a bunch of the stuff together, and then we will start taking some measurements for piston rings, the bearings, things like that, so that we can make sure that they're all set, and then we can start to reassemble the bottom part of the motor. And then once we kind of get that done, we'll reassemble the head, and then the whole engine will start to kind of piece together after that. All right, so I got all the bearings into the connecting rods, the clearance checked out, so that's good. So we know these bearings are good. I've now moved on to the piston rings, and so what I'm doing now is I'm checking the piston ring gap for these stock, piston rings. Basically, they're all manufactured typically to fit the engine, but you actually need to take each set of piston rings and actually test fit them into the cylinder and actually check the gap. So you can kind of see I already did piston number 1, so that one's done, but I went ahead and put in the top piston ring because there is 3 rings that go on here. There's a top ring, a secondary ring, and then you have an oil ring, which is an oil ring actually consists of 3 little individual pieces. Actually, there's actually a top ring, a second ring, and then there's kind of like a separate one that's a, I don't know what you want to call that, but whatever. So basically, I put that piston ring down in there, got it nice and level, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this gauge, and what I'm doing is I'm actually checking the little gap here that's in the piston ring, and I want to make sure that the gap is within spec so that it's creating the proper seal on the piston, so when it's going up and down and it's creating compression, that there's no blow by. So if you're not within the spec, then you will not have compression, you know, the engine will not run correctly. So basically, I'm going to start with the feeler gauge here and kind of see how it feels. So that's pretty good. It's hard to see, but it's catching a little bit. Let's go up 1. So that was 0.178 millimeters. Let's go to 0.203 millimeters. Let's see how that one is. It's a little tight. I think it's probably this one. So 0.178 millimeters. We can go over here real quick and let's see. Now we're going to want to check the manual, and let's see. So looking at the manual here, it says that the top ring is supposed to be basically between 0.015 and 0.03 millimeters, the limit. So looking at my gauge, I'm 0.178. So I'm within the limit here. You know, essentially, as the piston ring gap gets bigger, you know, then that's typically not as good. So I'm within the range here. So I have to go through and do that for every single ring, as well as each ring on the piston. So top, secondary, and oil ring. And I need to record all of my measurements so that I make sure I'm within the spec. So let's go do that. Okay, so I checked all the rings and all of them are within spec. So that's good. Let's see, I'm just gonna go ahead and get these out of here real quick. Okay. So now that the piston rings are all good, we know that they are within the specifications. We can actually assemble the pistons, which I'm going to put the piston rings onto each piston and get that set up. So we're good to go there. And then we'll be able to connect the connecting rods to the pistons. Alright, so I wanted to show a little tip. Essentially, I did the first piston here, got the rings on there. Basically, they will have to sit in a certain orientation, where they open, but I'll do that when I go to insert them in the engine. So for the next piston, I think what I wanted to show was some of the orientation of these rings. So Some of the rings on newer engines don't have an orientation, which means like they can go, you know, either way on the piston, but many older engines, I'd say you see it more where there is an orientation to the rings. And so if you put the rings on incorrectly, upside down, you know, the engine may not run as well. It'll consume more oil, things like that. And so this one's probably, this is the second ring that goes on the piston. And it's hard to see. I don't know if I can actually really make this out or not, but there's a little ledge to this thing. You can kind of see it. It's a tiny little ledge. It's not, this thing's not perfectly flat on both sides. There's this little bevel right here. And that bevel, and it also has a little, some markings here. Sometimes piston rings will have a little like dot over here, and that kind of tells you that the dot goes upwards. So I want to make sure that when I put this on, that bevel is down. Otherwise, I will have problems with the engine with that. So, little tip, make sure you put your piston rings on correctly and take the time. You can also always look at the ones that you took off your engine if you're going to replace them, but sometimes, depending upon if someone was in your engine before, they might not even put them in correctly. So use a manual, look at the manufacturer specs, make sure that you are following those if you want to assemble the engine correctly. Got the piston rings all assembled here with the crankshafts, connecting rods ready to go. So I'm now going to move over to actually start setting up the block for the crankshaft to go in. So I already put them in, but there's another set of basically bearings, just kind of like we did with the bearings with the connecting rods. There's bearings for the actual crankshaft as well. And so, oh man, I just noticed this thing's got some burrs on it, so we'll have to fix that and kind of smooth those out. Those are rough. Anyways, so we have put these bearing caps in here, and as you can tell, they have a little twang, I think they call it, here. And basically got those in there, so that's good to go. And so next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just kind of clean all the journals here, make sure it's all clean, and then I can actually take the crankshaft and we can set it inside the block. All right, next step, we are going to install the crankshaft caps on top of it. I've got the crankshaft currently in here, and I've put assembly lube on the bottom parts of the bearings. I put the new bearings into each of these caps. We're gonna use some more assembly lube. You know, obviously you really want to make sure your surfaces have a lot of lubrication on them when you assemble an engine. On this one, there's crankshaft thrust bearings. So on the middle cap here, there is an area where you have to put one of these thrust bearings, and this controls the basically the movement of the crankshaft this way and make sure that it stays in balance. So you can kind of see down in there, but there's another half of these. There's another part on the bottom. I've got those sitting in there. So got to make sure you always put those on there. And then these also have oil grooves on them. So you got to make sure that you have the grooves actually in the correct spot. And typically they always face outwards on here. You don't put them inwards, face them outwards, and that makes sure that oil can actually get by. So you put them in incorrectly, you would have potential bearing failure because it couldn't get lubricated with oil. So let's go ahead and let's put these caps in, and we'll try to get them torqued down. And there's going to be a pattern to making sure that it's all torqued evenly. Okay, so the caps are now all installed. I installed them kind of from the center, like outwards, to kind of help. I just think that from a, just kind of just spread the install. And then they're just lightly, they're kind of just, with a basic wrench tightened down so that I can kind of just check the movement of the crankshaft, make sure that it does not bind, or I'm not hearing any type of grinding. It sounds really good, sounds smooth. So now what we're going to do is we're going to torque down the caps with a torque wrench, and it calls for 28.9 foot-pounds of torque. So the manual, and I couldn't really find online the tightening, the torque sequence of tightening these down, So I'm just going to kind of follow what is a normal thing for an engine, which is typically you start in the center and you basically start to torque outwards on these bolts. So I'm going to just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Whoops. Well, actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to torque it, I think, that way. So I'm just going to make sure my gauge is right here, which it is, and we can torque. Okay, so now that I've torqued it down, we're going to try spinning it again. We'll check the play on this. It feels great. So if the thing locks up, then you definitely will have problems, and you don't want that. So I think we're good. Now that I think that's good there, we'll just do a retorque, make sure that they are all correct after giving it a spin a few times here. And then we'll be moving on to the next part. All right, so next up we are going to assemble the pistons to the connecting rods. That's pretty much straightforward. Take the piston, we're going to put the pin in here within this assembly, use the ring to hold it in there, and we're good to go. And then we'll do that for every single one of them, and then they can go inside of the engine block. Okay, so pistons are now in. The whole assembly is rotating freely without any friction. It feels good. It actually feels a little bit more snug than I'd say when I originally tore the engine down. I feel like it could spin a lot easier, which pretty much tells me just how worn out those piston rings might have been, as it just didn't have much friction to the side. So assembly feels a lot better. Everything is torqued down. We're in good shape. The next thing I'm doing is I'm starting to port and polish the head. I just did one runner to kind of show you guys the difference. So this runner right here, you can kind of see, this is the intake side of the head. And if you look down in there, you can see how it's rough, basically. You can see the casting line there on the left. And essentially this creates a lot of turbulence for the air and fuel mixture. So you port and polish it, basically just using like a die grinder and basically some little sanding bits.
and you can polish it and make it smooth so it looks more like this. So let's see, let me clean this out though a little bit here. And now if you're looking in there, you can see, basically see the casting line is gone because I grinded it all down. And basically I'm just making the walls of the whole port smooth, opposed to really rough in comparison. And so I'll do this for every runner on the intake side, and then we'll flip it over and we'll do it on the exhaust side as well. And the exhaust side is actually, I'd say, rougher than the intake side. So one little note that I've learned from other people is you can make the exhaust side ports polished and super shiny, and that's okay. But on the intake side, you actually don't want it to be perfectly polished smooth. Apparently that will create, you get like condensation, it'll stick to the walls for the air fuel mixture. So you actually want it to just be smooth but not polished out. So I'm just using kind of these regular bits, and it's creating, I think, a pretty good surface that will I think give me a little bit more air fuel flow. And you know, the power is minimal that you receive, but I wanted to at least try it on this engine, you know, for this before I do it maybe on the next engine. So I'm gonna finish doing that, and once this is all ported and polished out, we can actually start to reassemble the head with all the valves in it. I finished porting all of the heads, all of the intakes for the intake and exhaust side of the runners. So now they're nice and smooth all the way through, so that should give better airflow for the engine. I also started to clean up the valves. Obviously they were full of a lot of carbon before. They look really good. The one thing though that isn't the greatest, I'll try to show this as best as I can. There is some, let's see if I can get this to actually show on here. There's like some, it's hard to see. There is some slight pitting on the valve. So what there's pitting on there, that can be a problem. It's very, very light. It's tiny, but I can also see some pitting. So this is the exhaust side valve. You can usually always tell because the intake valves are usually always bigger than the exhaust valves. But it's hard to tell, but there is some pitting on the valve seat there as well. And so I am going to take some grinding compound with a lapping tool, and I'm going to see if I can actually kind of get those pits to clear off and get a nice smooth seat. Because you obviously, if the valve doesn't seat well, then the engine will not run correctly, or it'll be the engine life won't last very long. So I'm gonna try to go ahead and do that and get the valves done, because once we get that cleaned up, then we can start to reassemble the entire head. Okay, so we got the valve seats all nice and cleaned up, so they're all looking good, including the valves. I laid out all of the rest of the head parts here. So the cam cap, springs, little keepers, cam, and the rocker arms. So we'll go ahead and start to reassemble this. So we've fully assembled the head back together. Got the cam in there, all the rocker arms, the valves. They're all seated in here. It's filled with oil and assembly lube. I put on the camshaft seal, which surprisingly slips in there pretty easily. You know, more easily than I expected. So, but that's all good to go. I've set it up so that this is as close. This is cylinder 1 right here. So I've set this up to be as close as possible to top dead center. We will have to align it with the engine when we actually set up the timing on here, but we are now in a position where we can actually put the head on the engine. So it's, you know, two biggest pieces of the engine are going to mate together. So let's go ahead and let's start prepping to do that. We have got the head on and it is torqued down. Got the valve cover just sitting on it because I just kind of wanted to see how it all looked. It looks amazing. I still need to clean up the valve cover top a little bit some more, but other than that, I absolutely just love the way that it looks. It's clean looking with the blue. I kind of like it more than just red. I've never been a big fan of red as a color. So now that I've got that done, I will. I'll probably start assembling the front of the engine here, the timing and the water pump and the oil pump and all that stuff. I'm gonna take this back off. I don't want to damage it in any way when I'm trying to work on the rest of the engine, so we'll leave this off more until we get to the end, and then we'll put the valve cover on once most of the engine's assembled. Okay, so we've got the oil pump now on the engine. Unfortunately I damaged the O-ring gasket that goes on here. I don't know why I put it in the housing first before I put it on the engine, and really I should have just waited till it was on here and then put the ring on. So when I went to remove it to try to do that, I accidentally tore some of the rubber, so I'm gonna have to get a new O-ring for that. But looking at it, looks like I see good gasket coverage, the liquid gasket coming out around the sides of this, so that's good. We are on to the next step. We are going to install the water pump onto the block. It's going to go right in here. It's pretty simple. Luckily there's no liquid gasket. It's just this gasket that you just put on there, and then it's retained with 6 bolts. This is not the bolt for that. These bolts here, and we'll get it torqued down. Pretty simple. Alright, pretty simple. All of it's connected on here now. The bolts are just hand snug. We're going to go ahead and let's torque them. Okay, so now we got the timing belt on there. The timing is set on the engine, I think, hopefully. We'll find out. So now we're going to put the timing cover back on. I'm also going to put the oil dipstick in as well. Alright, the day has come to put the valve cover on top of the engine. I've got the whole timing set up, so I feel confident that that's all in place. So I'm now going to put the crown on top of the engine. So it's just pretty straightforward. There's a gasket that I already kind of laid out into the edge of the cover. There is 6 bolts that go in it, and then these are the old seals. I've got new seals here that are nice and round. These ones are all flat from years of use. So we'll basically put those all on there, and we'll torque it down. I'm also going to put a little bit of the gasket sealant, liquid gasket sealant here and here on both sides, because when the valve cover cinches down, you can sometimes get actually a little bit of a leak between the gaskets. So it's just a good idea to do that. Okay, now that we got the valve cover on, I've rotated the block upside down, and we're actually going to install the oil pan. But to do that, we need to install the block stiffener plate. We need to install the oil pickup as well. I've got the bolts laid out here for these, and then we'll also put in the dipstick too, but we'll have to flip the block back up to upside down, up to top right to put that in. So first we're going to put these in. We have to put a bead of sealant, gasket sealant, all around here after we put the block plate on and the oil pickup. And then also there is a couple of these gaskets, which are interesting. They actually go down in here. They actually slide down in there, and they seal the rear main cap from leaking oil out. Kind of interesting design. I usually don't see these, but we're going to basically do all that, and then we'll put the oil pan cover on, and we are one step closer. We have got the transmission in and put the axles back on. There's pins to actually, you can kind of see it right there. I'll see here if I can get this to stick for just a second. There's pins that hold the CV axles in, and I just found out this one went in just fine, but the other one that's back here, it's hard to see. There's an orientation to them, so you can't just put the boot, you can't just put this on basically in either way. The splines are actually cut, so you really actually have to make sure that it is aligned in there, because it could look aligned when you're trying to light through it, but it's actually not. So make sure that it's straight, otherwise the pin just won't go in. And I had to fiddle with it for probably 30 minutes. So I've got the engine just sitting on the bench right now. And for anybody who's watching this, right, you may think like, oh my god, I'm damaging it. I'm not. I got this really thick foam, and I've just got the engine on its side. It was the easiest way to get it so I could put the flywheel and the clutch assembly on it. So I'm gonna basically pick this thing up and hoist it. If anybody wants to know where I'm gonna be hoisting this thing from, I took a piece of metal plate, I drilled a hole, and then I used a bolt just to bolt it to the block here, and then I'm using basically a simple C clamp to go through here and here. So I'll basically use this because the engine kind of almost sits like at this angle. It sits slightly more like this when it's in there. So I'm gonna use the chain to make it so that the thing will be sitting at the right angle when I go to drop it into the back of the truck. And that way I have to fiddle with it as least as possible to get it in there. Engine is now back in the truck. It's a pretty big step, so pretty. It looks great, I think, when the especially when we get the bumper back on and everything. It's gonna look really good. Still need to do a few things, come back and polish this part and whatnot, but it went in pretty well. I forgot to put that there was a motor mount over here like an idiot, so I had to do that. So next up will be to probably start doing most of the coolant assembly here that's down below. Once I do that, then I'll probably start to put the cables back together here, wire up the transmission, you know, before I start putting some of the bigger accessories on, like the carburetor and things like that. So we'll do all of that, and then the exhaust system will be next. After I'll do the exhaust system last, after I get most of the accessories done up here. We'll put that on as that the final piece. So I have got all of the hoses on now for the cooling system. It actually went back on easier than I expected, and they all lined up, which is good. I don't look like I'm missing anything. So I'm now going to move on to put the carburetor back on. I've got over here. Before I put it on though, I need to check the float in the bowl. That's in the bottom here. This is the bowl here. I need to check the float. I don't think the float's set correctly, just based on how the car was running previously. So I don't think it's shutting off. So I'm gonna check that, make sure that's okay, and then we will get that bolted onto the intake here. And then we're gonna hook up a bunch of these vacuum hoses. So there's all these vacuum hoses that go on this thing. There's all this fucking emission stuff. So we'll connect all that in there. Once we have that connected, then we will reconnect all the wiring on the car. So just the wiring is actually pretty simple, you know, pretty basic harness. And then we'll connect back the shifter cables, the speedometer, the clutch cable, and we'll be pretty close. Okay, so here's something to know about some carburetors. They don't all work like this, but the Subaru Sambar does. When you take it apart, the bowl, you have to be very careful, but because there's actually a little check ball that actually sits in this side of the bowl. So when you have the carburetor flipped upside down like I do, and you go to remove it, this thing will fall out. So if you don't notice it, you don't realize that you're missing it, but it is it's required to make the car work properly. So make sure not to miss it when you go to install it. So be on the lookout. And if you don't find the check ball, then you have a problem. So make sure to pay attention.